Now open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes as we're looking at the findings and conclusion of this great philosopher, the preacher, the king, and as we will see and noted last Sunday, the scientist, Solomon. Remember that the objective of the book is found there in chapter 2 and verse 3. That he might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. He's addressing these great questions that are addressed by philosophy. What are we here for? What's it all about? Why do we do what we do? And what's the best thing to do with the time we have here? And remember that as he is processing this information, he's doing it within the framework of under the sun. Not considering and relating life to what's beyond the sun, but just to what we can find in this world, in our experience, in the limited time we have here under the sun. And he comes to a very despairing conclusion that it's all vanity of vanities and vexation, that is disappointment of spirit, that everything ultimately ends up disappointing us, that nothing brings in this world lasting satisfaction. In fact, he said that God has given this sore travail to the sons of man to be exercised therewith, so that indeed everything we encounter, no matter how pleasurable, at some point encounters pain and hardship, leaving us in the end disappointed if we're seeking our ultimate satisfaction there. And remember that Solomon was eminently qualified to do this experiment. First of all, he lived under a government that was the best form of government you could have, a constitutional monarchy delivered straight from the hand of God. It was a great place, like I said, to get an education. They had a superior government over all the other nations. And he was given wisdom, intellect, above everybody else before and after him. The man had a tremendous IQ, capacity for absorbing information. And he had all the advantages of royalty. He had power and wealth with which to conduct his research. He had a peaceful reign. He was not distracted by war. And so it was a great environment for this great research. He didn't have to do a lot of time trying to negotiate peace settlements and strategies of war with his war cabinet. And owing to his fame, he was sought after from all the kings of the earth, which would have given him personal acquaintance with all these other cultures and achievements. So he was in an ideal position to do this research, this in-depth research, to find out what is it all for? What is it all about? And I know that every one of us at some point in our lives stops and asks ourselves, what am I here for? What am I accomplishing? What have I accomplished? And what did it amount to? What was it all for? And these are the kinds of questions that Solomon is investigating. And we left off last Sunday where he said in verse 15, that which is crooked cannot be made straight. And we just looked at the fact of how much of our life is spent trying to straighten things out only to have it go crooked again. And that which is wanting cannot be numbered, which is obvious on the face of it. So then we pick up at verse 16 where Solomon said, I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate. And he had. I mean, the man was unbelievably wealthy. I am come to great estate. His power extended broadly. And I've gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. And that was true. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. The first thing I want to point out is Solomon communed with his own heart. And this is the wonder of our humanness, that we can and do actually communicate with ourselves. And we do. We carry on dialogues within our minds. We ask ourselves questions. We do research. We answer those questions. So with this thought of communing with his own heart, in essence, what he is telling us is that he talked to himself and carried on dialogue with himself. Because that's what you read of people doing in the Bible when they're having a conversation. It'll say they were communing. And so Solomon basically talked with himself, had dialogue with himself. And so if you're a person that talks to yourself, and people say that looks crazy, Well, the wisest man in the world did it, so don't think of it like that. Most of you believe that Conrad Jarrell was a very intelligent man. Conrad Jarrell talked to himself. I know when I was a guest at his home, I'd hear him in the bathroom, or if I was in his home, I'd hear him in the bathroom just talking away, and I do the same. In fact, when someone told my sister, when my mother told my sister that the church was going to start putting me up to preach, she said they might as well. He does it all the time anyway in front of the mirror in the bathroom. And I did. I preached many a sermon there. And my wife does it too. So we both go around the house having very lively conversation with ourselves. And once in a while we cross over and talk to each other. Well, Solomon did too, so we take consolation there. But he showed this tremendous capacity we have for self-reflection and carrying on dialogue within ourselves. And then he says his wisdom exceeded all men before him and after him. And we've already looked at the verses that said that in 1 Kings 3, 12 through 13, and 1 Kings 4, 29 through 33, which I will not read again, for we read it last week when we were talking about the fact that he had this advantage of a superior intellect with which to do his research. But what really intrigues me is where he says there at the end of verse 16, yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Now that word experience means the action of putting to the test, trial, and experiment, proof by actual trial, practical demonstration. So Solomon not only knew wisdom and knowledge theoretically, he also knew it by experience. He did the experiments. This is one of the interesting things that I note in 1 Kings 4 and verse 33 that says, he spake of trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. And he spake also of beasts and of fowl and of creeping things and of fishes. And he studied these things. Like he said, he learned by experience. He didn't just read books about birds. He had birds. He had beasts. He had gardens. He had all these things that he wrote about, so that he studied these things in personal experience. He did experiments. So that you can say based on this verse that again, Solomon was not only a preacher and a king and a philosopher, and I might add a psychologist, he was a scientist of the first order. I think that's interesting. And he says in verse 17, I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also vexation or disappointment of the spirit, troubling to the spirit, vexation of spirit. And he gave his heart to do this. And the fact that he did that shows that this was a serious investigation to which he devoted his deepest self. In other words, he really wanted to know. When you give your heart to something, you're giving your deepest self to that. So he's really, really trying to find out. Just, if I may say to all you kids in school, you'll learn far more, you'll do far better if you give your heart to it. Not just your body and your brain to do what you have to do, but I mean we really have a heart to want to know, to want to learn. You'll always do better in anything when the heart is given to it. But now he said he gave his heart to know wisdom. This is not the wisdom that we read about in Proverbs that is founded in the fear of God, a wisdom that has very positive results. This pursuit of wisdom had a negative result. The conclusion? Vanity of vanities and vexation of spirit. That's not the conclusion you get when you read about the wisdom that is rooted in the fear of God that is set before us in the book of Proverbs. That wisdom yields positive results. This is the wisdom that can be gained by studying the creation without reference to what is beyond it. This is the wisdom that men gain when they study astronomy, when they study geology, oceanography, when they study biology and psychology, that kind of wisdom. Studying the creation itself. Again, studying what can be learned without reference to what is beyond it. Commenting on this verse in that book, The Message of Ecclesiastes by Derek Kinder, he said, we can assume that the wisdom he speaks of is as his method demands, the best thinking that man can do on his own. This is man analyzing his world and his reason for being in it on his own with the best thinking he can do on his own. That's what we're finding here in the book of Ecclesiastes. This is what education is generally about, or what it should be about. This wisdom that Solomon gives his heart to involves the capacity of reason with which all men are endowed. Every man is endowed with the ability to reason, to think cause and effect, means and ends, to collect information, connect the dots, and draw conclusions. This is what brings about the advances in medicine, the advances in technology, and the building of civilization. This wisdom involves the capacity of reason, but which also renders, with which all men are endowed, and by which civilization has been developed. But it is also this capacity that renders men without excuse for not using it to discover the existence of God. Not using this capacity of reason to collect the data from the raw creation and conclude from that there has to be a designer, a creator of eternal power and Godhead. Let me give you two verses along this line. That all men are endowed with this capacity to reason. In Job 38, in verse 36, Job made this statement: "Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts?" This is talking about that inner intelligence that all men are endowed with to do the things that I just mentioned. Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts? Who hath given understanding to the heart? And then you take that and connect it with Romans chapter 1, and you've got exactly what I'm talking about. In Romans 1, 19 and 20. Because that which may be known of God is manifest, watch it now, in them. They have something in them that enables them to know there is a God. That which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath revealed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So again, man has the responsibility to use this marvelous capacity, not only to discover his world and to develop his world, but also to discover the existence of its creator, so that he is indeed without excuse. But not only did Solomon examine wisdom and dig into what could be into wisdom and knowledge, but he also attempted by this means to know madness and to know folly. He also looked at the other side, not only at the side of wisdom, but at the side of madness and folly, to see what he could find out there. The word madness means mental disease, insanity. He tried what it was like to be crazy. He experimented with that. And folly, which is the quality or state of being foolish or deficient in understanding, want of good sense, weakness or derangement of mind, also unwise conduct. Giving himself to know madness and folly compares with those we see even in our own day, who give themselves wholeheartedly to weird, crazy forms of art, dress, music, or being spaced out states of consciousness. You see that even today, of people that will just go into this, or go down to the art museum, look at modern art, you'll see something about giving oneself to madness and to folly, or some of the music, the screaming, the noise. I mean, I wonder if Solomon dyed his hair green and had his orchestra compose all kind of senseless music and just smeared things on a canvas to call it art. And then you get an idea of somebody that gave himself to madness and folly to see what answers might be found there. He was having struggles finding the ultimate answers in education, so why not see if the crazy people have got it? Well, he found they didn't. And so this whole quest, he ends up says, I perceive that this also is vexation of spirit. But then he goes on, and I want to elaborate on this particular verse. Like I said, there will be verses that I'll stop on or stop at and elaborate on, because I think there's just a very important point that I want to make with it. Especially in the wake of some of the things that I've been warning about on the Wednesday night Bible studies, of spending too much time delving into conspiracies and trying to figure out what's going on from the sinister viewpoint. I want you to look at this verse. Why he finds this thing he gave his heart to, a vexation of spirit, for in much wisdom is much grief. And he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Now again, this wisdom that brings all this grief and all this sorrow is not the wisdom that makes one wise unto salvation that we read of in 2 Timothy 3:15, and that from a child thou hast known the Holy Scriptures, that are able to make thee, or which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith that is in Christ Jesus. This is not that wisdom that we get from the divine revelation. This is the wisdom we get from the halls of academia, or from our own research into history and science and mathematics and you name it. Again, within the framework of under the sun rather than beyond the sun. Más allá del sol, as the Spanish say. This is not the wisdom that makes one wise unto salvation, we repeat. This is the wisdom that makes one wise unto despair, which is exactly what happened in Solomon's case. Because it works like this. Why is it that wisdom, and much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow? Why is that? It makes sense when you think about it. Because the more you know, the more you see how bad things really are. I think it was D. Ruma, and I think she was probably quoting somebody else that said, when you think everything's going well, you don't know what's going on. If you think everything's going real well in the family, you don't know what's going on. See, the more you know, the more you see how bad things really are. And the more you know, the more ignorant you realize you are. I can say that of a truth. The more I know about the Bible, the more I realize I don't know. I've just started reading Ezekiel's temple vision beginning at chapter 40. I am reading words. My brain only has this vague recollection of what I saw when I looked at a YouTube that gives you a picture of what Ezekiel's describing so that it finally makes some semblance of sense. See, I don't think architecturally. I think verbally. And so when I read of all these architectural features, I'm just reading words. And there's just so much about this. I don't know what to do with it. I mean, there's all kinds of things in the Bible I haven't figured out yet. I don't know what to do with it. Like I say, the more you know, the more ignorant you realize yourself to be. And more troubling than that is the more you know, the more you realize how often you have been wrong. Anybody that never can admit they're wrong is one of the most ignorant, stupid people on the face of the earth. Put a fork in that one, I'll guarantee you. Because the more you really know, the more you realize how often you have been wrong. The more I do this job, the more I look back and see how pitiful what I've done has in actuality been. It's the grief that goes with knowing more and learning more. The more you realize how often you've been wrong. And yet even more troubling is the more you know, the more easily you see how you could be wrong. And that is troubling, especially when your job is to be right. One of the things I try to do, and I don't do it perfectly, is when I take a position, I will try to put myself in the shoes of the enemy and say, okay, now if I was going to attack this, where are the weak spots? I try to think of how would he come at this? And what would be my defense if he came at it this way? That's actually been very helpful, because I have been engaged in dialogue with people where we, in an adversarial way, and I will sometimes know before they get there where they may go. And sure enough, they go there, and I'm ready for them because I've already anticipated the argument. I knew that was coming. They thought they had one on me. I beat you to the draw. And I've learned over the years in dealing with controversy to think that way. I have to think that way because I am set for the defense of the gospel. And the more you know about what your enemy is going to do, the better you're able to head him off at the pass. And so anyway, again, and I'll tell you this, and this is very important. Whenever you take a position and you have an adversary, that adversary is going to look for every weakness in your argument that he can find. And when that adversary points out a weakness in your argument, for truth's sake, don't let your ego get in the way. If it's a weakness, if it's an error, own it. Thank God you found out about it. Your enemy did you a favor. Don't just throw it out for personal reasons because it came from an enemy. That's where your ego's getting in the way. You just can't admit you're wrong. Well, we can all be wrong. But the more you know, the more you realize how easily you could be wrong. And like I say, that brings grief. In fact, the truth of the matter is there is a very heavy price to pay for having a high IQ. Some of the greatest minds in history have suffered Great Depression, and Solomon will be an example of one such. Because much wisdom brings much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. But there is also this point that needs to be brought in here, and that is, we cannot know everything, nor should we try. You can try to know too much, and all you're going to do is bring into your life a whole big package of more grief and sorrow. In fact, it's none other than the Bible itself that will teach us to set boundaries on our pursuit of knowledge. I'm going to give you a string of verses that will clearly show this. We need to set boundaries on our pursuit of knowledge. This is one of the problems I find with the modern day internet. Anything you want to know, as much as you want to know, is at your fingertips, so easily accessible that the only way to curb this overflux of knowledge into the head is personal self-discipline that sadly many people lack. But let me give you some verses for whatever good they're going to do. In Psalm 131:1, Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor mine eyes lofty. Remember, knowledge puffeth up. You got to be careful. My heart is not haughty, nor mine eyes lofty, neither do I exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. There are just some subjects, some things that are just too great and too big and too much for my limited mind to sort it out. It's just that way. So no need to exercise myself in that, or things too high for me. And you know, there are some things that God has stuck in this book, and He just tells us this little bit, and He doesn't tell us a whole lot. And when that happens, you just be content with the little bit He told you and quit trying to speculate beyond. That's where you get yourself in trouble. Example. And I think God did this to try us. I think God did this to test us. I think God did this so you could recognize somebody that's trying to be too wise and too knowledgeable and not observing due boundaries. And that is in the book of Revelation chapter 10. John hears 7 thunders. And these are voices of thunders. And he starts to utter what they say. And the Lord said, seal it up. Don't write it. So you say, well, what was the message of the 7 thunders? I don't know. John was told not to tell. But would you believe I've got them in my home? You can get down commentaries and commentators will tell you what the 7 thunders were. Yes. I read one commentator said it was 7 papal bulls. Sir, your explanation is bull. At least you admitted partially that it was just that, bull. It is amazing. People will do stuff like that. Speculate and go all over the place beyond what is written. So David set that one to rest there. I do not exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. Then look at Psalms. I got Proverbs on my mind. I'll get there in a minute. Psalms 41. Psalms 41. And this is something, brethren, you don't want to be doing. This is knowledge you don't need to be going around trying to gather. But you'd be surprised people do this. Reporters are notorious for this. On the left and on the right. Psalm 41, 5 and 6. Mine enemies speak evil of me. When shall he die and his name perish? I've always thought that was interesting. This is a Psalm of David. They were wondering when would his name perish. People are still named David today. And never did blot it out, did they? Never did get rid of it. They thought they could. And if he's come to see me, he speaketh vanity. He comes and he's acting like he has the best of intentions. His heart gathereth iniquity to itself. You see, he's on a witch hunt. And he goeth abroad and he telleth it. You see, we don't need to know everything that's wrong about everybody else. Especially when our objective is to go spread it abroad to discredit their character. But there are people like that. They're iniquity gatherers. They love to get dirt on people. And then in Psalm 64:6, speaking of the secret counsel of the wicked, the insurrection of the workers of iniquity, the enemies, it says, verse 6, they search out iniquities. They accomplish a diligent search. Both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep. And then just remember this that we looked at on Wednesday night from Proverbs 16. Are you getting an idea that there's some pursuits of knowledge best left undone? It's wicked people here that are trying to find out more than they need to know or have a right to know. In Proverbs 16 and verse 27, an ungodly man diggeth up evil, goes on this mission to find out all this evil, and in his lips there is a burning fire. He's got to go abroad and he's got to tell it. One thing I do not do in this church, I am not running a Gestapo to go out and find out whatever evil I can about people in this church. I don't doubt, but probably if I were of the sort, I could do some digging and I could probably find out more dirt than I already know. And what would that do for me? Only increase my grief and my sorrow. I figured if I need to know, God will bring it to light. Otherwise, I'm not going to go on some witch hunt or like a Gestapo digging up whatever I can about people, only to increase my own grief and sorrow. I mean, really, how would you like me to know every indiscreet moment in your life? How would you like me to know every indiscreet thing you ever say? How would you like me to know everything you did just this last week? Mighty quiet. You know what? I wouldn't want you doing that to me either. See, that's a characteristic of wicked people that do stuff like that. I mean, if something is brought to light, then it has to be looked into and it has to be judged. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if it needs to be, God will bring it to light. Otherwise, if there's something in your life that you've done that is abominable or evil or wrong, and you repent of it, and you make it right with God, and I never find out, and the church never finds out, thank God. And you can better bet one thing about Ben Mott. Whenever I discover things about people that are even bad enough to get excluded for, if there is a way to cover it, I will cover it. I've done it many times, and I will continue to do so, because love covers a multitude of sins. That's the work of charity. If a brother err from the truth, and one convert him, know that he that converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and hide A multitude of sins. There's your verse. But going on to show that there needs to be limits placed on how much knowledge we stuff our heads with, we come over to Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. People spend an awful lot of time digging into evil report. At least devote some time to some good report. If there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. You see, he just gave you a grid to process information through, to sort through what you want to focus your mind on, because that's what it means to think on, and what you want to just let go. It's not necessary for you to put your mind there too much on that. In Colossians 2:18, let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, obviously trying to find out things better left unknown, at least for now. 2 Thessalonians 3:11, what do you suppose feeds gossips and busybodies? It's wanting to know more than they need to know. Trying to find out stuff that's none of their business so they can go spread it around. As Paul warns in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 11, for we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. And go look up that word. And it's you tending to other people's business, sticking your nose in where it doesn't belong, trying to find out what is not yours to know. Period. In 2 Peter chapter 1, 5 and 6, I think this is an interesting juxtaposition of terms. We are told in 2 Peter 1, 5 and 6 to add to virtue knowledge, or add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge. But notice, interestingly, the next thing he tells you to add to knowledge. Temperance. You know what temperance is? Restraint. Restraint. Now, of course, when you remember that knowledge puffeth up, you want to be very careful to catch the workings of pride and arrogance. You want to put a check on that and bring it back down. But just if you think about the fact that too much knowledge of more than you need to know and is practically valuable to know can turn around being harmful, then it makes sense that in the pursuit of knowledge you would add restraint. Because we cannot know everything, nor do we need to know everything. And the man that's talking to you right now is a man that has a great hunger for knowledge. I am a professional student. It's my job to learn, to learn, to learn. But I've also had to learn over the years what's the most important thing for me to learn. And it's wrapped in one volume I can hold in my hand. No matter how much I know about science or history or languages or biology or whatever, you name it. No matter how much I know about those things and could impress you with the wealth of my knowledge, I will have failed in my calling if I come up shortchanged on this. And that for me at my age is a troubling thought, as well it should be. For I will stand before the judgment seat to primarily give an account for how I stand with this. And you will find that Solomon, in all of his wide quest to find that which is good for the sons of men, will end up on this, with this, as defining the whole duty of man. And then Revelation 2:24, but unto you I say, and unto the rest in Thyatira, as many as have not this doctrine and which have not known the depths of Satan, as they speak, I will put upon you none other burden. He is commending these people for things they don't know. And this again, you've got to be careful about how much you get into all this conspiracy stuff and all the evil of these organizations like the Masons and the Skull and Bones and the Illuminati and the Jesuits. You want to be careful how far you go in that. I remember Conrad Gerald telling me years ago that he bought a copy of the book Morals and Dogma, which is like the manual for Freemasonry, put out by Albert Pike. And he said he started reading that and, the philosophy of it and what they're up to. And he said he caught himself and realized this was starting to have a very bad effect on him. That he just could not absorb too much of this stuff without it starting to affect him in an unhealthy way. I've told the story years ago in the early days of my ministry. We had a couple that moved over here to Amherstburg in Canada from British Columbia. Sold his business and moved over there. I remember baptizing them one night in the Detroit River, and the current was going so quickly they had to tie a rope around me, and I went out in the water with a rope around me and baptized them in the cold Detroit River in October. There's a picture of that. You can see Ed May and Howard Lamont. They were there. Howard was still living here watching that. Well, this man wanted to become very knowledgeable about the conspiracy. I mean, he wanted to become an authority. And by the way, this man caused me problems and ended up leaving. And actually, it was a relief when he went. But anyway, be that as it may, that's another story. But he was going to become this authority on the occult. And he went on this mission to buy all these books about all these occult organizations. And I remember there was an occult bookstore somewhere over in this area. I don't know if it's still there or not, probably not, that we went in. And I remember he was buying all these books in there. And I'm telling you, people, you could feel the devil in that place. You could cut the devils with a knife in that place. I was glad we got out of there. That place was evil. Evil. And there's another place I recommend you never go, and that's Venice Beach in California. Stay away from it. I mean, that's where the people give themselves to madness and folly. I mean, you want to see a bunch of kooks and crazies, you go to Venice Beach in California. I remember I was taken there to see it, and I wanted to get out of there. You could feel the devil in that place. I mean, you could feel it. It was evil. But anyway, be that as it may, so this fellow was going to become this great authority on the occult. And I remember getting a telephone call at 4 o'clock in the morning, and this man was under frightful oppression. Man, pray for me. He was so under such oppression from filling his head with all this stuff. You know what he did? The next day he took those books, lit a fire in a can, and burned them. Burned them. You see, there's just some things we don't have to dig into. We're not we told in Romans chapter 16 to be wise concerning that which is good and simple concerning that which is evil? You got to be careful how much you dig into this kind of stuff, because remember, to increase knowledge is to increase sorrow and grief. And bear this in mind, friends, it was knowing what was not his to know that ruined man in the beginning. You're aware of that, aren't you? That's what got us in trouble, that curiosity to find out what we don't need to know. You know, a negative definition of curiosity, there's a positive use and a negative use, and a negative use of that is trying to know what you don't need to know. The old saying, curiosity killed the cat. And so we read in Genesis 3:22, and the Lord God said, behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil. See, his problem was he came to know what was not his to know. And of course, I always come back to this, to too much unnecessary knowledge will clutter the mind and crowd out necessary knowledge, the necessary knowledge of the Word of God. As Jesus said in Luke chapter 8:14, and that which fell among thorns are they which when they have heard go forth and are choked with the cares and riches and pleasures of this life. And you spend too much time gathering too much information, you're going to increase the load of things you got to care about and worry about. Listen, dig around on the internet. Dig into the subject of nutrition, and you'll starve to death. Because everything you put in your mouth, somebody's going to say is going to kill you. So you might as well just be moderate and go with the flow. It's the truth. It's the truth. You won't put anything in your mouth because everything's going to... See, that's that care. And it comes from just filling your head with more knowledge than you need to. And then Luke chapter 21, verse 34. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, and surfeiting is excess. And you can apply that to most anything. I mean, look at this, talking about putting limits on knowledge, and about the man that took his occult books and went out and burned them. Look at this. He had scriptural precedent. If you go over to Acts chapter 18 and verse 19, Acts chapter 19 and verse 19. I'm sorry, I have the wrong reference there. Acts 19:19. Many of them also, these were people that were converted, believed the gospel. Many of them also, which used curious arts, brought their books together and burned them before all men. And they counted the price of them and found it 50,000 pieces of silver. That was a lot of books. Why did they burn it? Because this was knowledge people don't need to know. This was knowledge better eradicated and destroyed than maintained and passed on for people to study for whatever reason. We just don't need to know everything and dig into everything. You can know more than you need to know, and with that, simply increase your sorrow. So learn to put boundaries on that. And again, there's nothing wrong with learning things from a hobby standpoint. I take myself as a case in point. I love languages. I would love to study more than I do. I love learning foreign languages. For me, it's a hobby, it's a pastime. But even there, I have to put boundaries. I studied Russian for 2 years. I've always been fascinated about Russia for some reason. I guess because it was the so other, on the other side behind the Iron Curtain. And I've always been a person that's fascinated by the other and the foreign. And so I had an opportunity. Hank was taking a little Russian class because he was going to go over to Russia for work. They were going to teach him some rudimentary Russian, so I joined in with Hank in the class. I got really fascinated with it, and I not only did the 2 classes, but I went on and several of us guys hired the teacher as a private tutor, and I studied it for 2 years. I was getting pretty good at it. I could read basic text, I could write stories, I could write poems, and I was having a lot of fun. And then I began to realize I'm spinning my wheels here. Because to really get good at this, I've got to devote more time. And then I asked myself, for what purpose? Am I ever going to go to Russia? What are the odds? And even if I go, what then is it after that? And I finally realized that, having already reached a reasonable degree of command of German and French and Spanish, I probably just needed to content myself with that and let the Russian go. It was hard, because when you invest yourself in something, it's really hard to let it go. That's one of the reasons you want to be careful about your knowledge pursuit, because you dig into a particular thing, and you dig and dig and dig and dig, and you acquire so much knowledge. Now you got to do something with it to justify it. Your ego steps in. I cannot just know this and not have some kind of result come out of it. See what I'm saying? So that was hard to do that, and I don't regret that I did it, because I learned a lot about language in general. I think my study of foreign languages has been beneficial because it keeps me involved in the science of words and word definitions and grammar and construction of sentences. And I find that in studying other languages, I learn a lot about my own. And then when I was going to go to China, the idea of going to China and not at least be able to say something, so I retained a tutor for 5 months. I was pretty good at it, getting pretty good at it. But again, I couldn't justify keeping it up because of the time. So you see, I've learned from personal experience that as much as I might want to know, I got to put restraints, especially as I get older and time is running out, and I only have so many years left. And in the end, when I stand before God, He's not going to be impressed by how well I speak Russian or Chinese. This is what He's going to hold me to. What did you do with what I gave you to do with? You're my word, as a minister of my word. So I think it bears stopping a moment and asking ourselves as we're digging and digging and digging for this information, to what end? To what end? And is it more than I need to know? And is it costing me what is most important to know? I mean, there are some people that are walking encyclopedias, but when it comes to personal relationships, they're out of touch. Personal relationships are so important, very important. I remember something Jim Ruma said years ago, and it resonated with me to this day. He said that he found out that really the most important things in life are relationships. And he's right. How important. I mean, one of the things my daughter said to me as I contemplated whether continuing to study Russian or not, and by the way, some of you will hear us in the family refer to Brittany as Dutch, and all the kids call her Aunt Dutch to this day. Well, the reason for that is when I was studying Russian, I taught her a few Russian words, and the Russian word for daughter is Dutch. And I would call her Dutch, daughter, and that just stuck. So I let the Russian go, but the name stuck, and to this day she's Aunt Dutch to the kids, and we call her Dutch. And I remember when I was weighing whether to continue or not, and Brittany said she was just a little tight. She said, well, if you give it up, you'll have more time for the family. Powerful argument, wouldn't you say? Powerful argument. Instead of spending hours and hours on the computer. Anyway, the more you know, you can increase a lot of sorrow unnecessarily. So we want to practice temperance with regard to the pursuit of knowledge. Now, again, Solomon continues there. I'm going now into chapter 2. Can you believe it? But I'm done with chapter 1. We're moving into chapter 2 now, folks. And Solomon continues his quest to see what is that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. In other words, what's the best way to spend my time while I'm down here? And he said, I said in mine heart, see, he's communing with himself, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure. And behold, this also is vanity. And I said of laughter, it's mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? So in this quest to find the good, he tries mirth and laughter. He looks on the comic side of things. Mirth is pleasurable feeling, enjoyment, gratification, joy, happiness. Look at the contrast here. Given the grief and the sorrow that wisdom and knowledge begat, he thinks, okay, why not try pleasure? In other words, I've been working hard at studying all week at school, and it's now the weekend, party time. See, nothing new under the sun. So given, like as I say, the grief and sorrow that wisdom and knowledge begat, why not try pleasure? This is obviously, when he's talking about mirth and enjoying pleasure and proving with mirth, he's obviously talking about carnal mirth rather than spiritual joy, because if it was spiritual joy, he wouldn't come up with the conclusion, vanity of vanities and vexation of spirit. So trust you understand. In other words, what he's saying is he's going to try the party life to see if that was best for man. And you know, it's a fact that multitudes still think that's where real living is. You know that. The party life. They live all week for the party life to see if that is where it's really at. And then he makes an interesting conclusion. He said, I said of laughter, it is mad. Stop and ask yourself, how many insanely stupid things have you said or done in a fit of laughter? And you'll begin to know why he says it's mad. And then when you consider the varied sounds and facial contortions that different people make when they laugh, you understand why it is mad. Shall I illustrate? I had an aunt, Aunt Ruth, and when she would laugh, she would assume the vomit pose. My grandmother Lula would do like this. I notice a lot of men, it doesn't matter how deep their voice is, they go into the falsetto when they laugh. I'll do that. Conrad would start out like that. And then he'd go down to his bass voice. Some women, you hear them. They go in the bass. I know a man that laughs like this. Seriously. My dad, I remember him laughing at something one time, and Dad is big around up here, you know, like a gorilla. My friend Monford, I miss him. He'd have made a great Santa Claus. Then I've heard this one. Sounds sinister. Or this is the one. Oh, the laughter through the sinus. Excuse me. I don't like that one. You can hear the mucus rumbling around in that one. We had a woman in our choir when I was a member at the Ortega Presbyterian Church in Jacksonville. She'd laugh like this. Woe betide if the pastor told a joke in the pulpit and you got that coming from the choir loft. I mean, we had a quality choir. And then some people, they laugh while they're talking. They're, you know, they'll be going along and they're telling you maybe the most terrible thing. Or this one, while they're talking to you, they laugh all along while they're just about to drive you insane when they do that. And yes, Jennifer, you do that sometimes, and you picked it up from Sheila. I can tell you right now, just catch yourself sometimes when you're talking. It's crazy. Now, do you know why he said it's madness? I mean, really, when you put it all together. Courtney Laba can move from laughter to crying and never switch faces. Listen, you look right now, you'd swear she was bawling, and she's laughing. She starts out laughing, and you think she's still laughing. Now she's switched to crying, and they never change the face. And so one can now begin to understand. Listen to that. Doesn't that sound No, you got me. It's mad. We're all going crazy right now. We're in an insane asylum. So you can begin to understand what he said. I've left her. And remember, this is a man that's analyzing it all by wisdom. He's trying to keep his smarts about him. He said, I said of laughter, it is mad. When you consider, like I say, the varied sounds and facial contortions that different people make when they laugh, you understand why it's mad. And really, what profit is there really in an experience that only yields a laugh? But then he also found mirth, just pleasure and fun in general. He found it to be so empty that it left the question, what doeth it? What did I really accomplish? What did I really get from that? What doeth it? Now, don't get me wrong. Mirth and laughter are fine in moderation. We don't mean to criticize it altogether. I actually utilize humor in my sermons for really a very serious purpose, because I know I flood you people with a bunch of information. So this gives you a mental break, just kind of a little mental breather. That's why I do that. And mirth and laughter are fine in moderation to give reprieve from the toil and grief of life, but they are not the ultimate good of life. I dearly, dearly love my friend in Germany that passed away this last summer. But he was a man that loved mirth. He loved the fun things. He loved to go to birthday parties and social events. He sang in a choir, and by the way, they made beautiful music in that choir. This was a quality choir. And he would have a weekend house. He loved to go garden and grow flowers and vegetables and so forth with his wife. And he liked to travel and so forth, and had a great sense of humor and loved to laugh. And yet, as he got old, he had a serious problem with his knees. He ended up with 4 surgeries, and it limited his mobility for the rest of his life. And so he had to give up driving, had to give up his weekend house. He had to give up so many things that were fun in life. And he spent the last 2 years of his life in crippling depression. And he told me, he said, Ich war so lebensfreudig. I just really enjoyed life. And see, when that mirth was taken away, and again, I loved him dearly. We had some good, serious conversations. When it came to hospitality, they were the ultimate in expression of hospitality. But still, He loved this world and the fun he could have in it. And as he was getting old, and I would talk, I remember him saying, "Es gibt keinen Ausweg, there's no way out." He was locked in this depression, and I said, "Well, there's heaven." And the response I would get was, "Yeah." You see, his thinking was so confined under the sun and not beyond the sun. And so it left him with the last 2 years of life in a crippling, pitiful depression. You see what happens when that's the only reference point you have? And then when you don't have the wherewithal to enjoy all that mirth, then what's it for? Nothing left but depression. It was sad to see that. And I think Solomon here is addressing exactly why a person would come to that end if for them mirth was the ultimate experience of life. Solomon found it to be so empty. And then he goes on and he says in verse 3, "I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom." And so he became a connoisseur of wine, thinking that, well, maybe I'll find the ultimate good in life and all the vintages and the various wines. But notice that he did it from the standpoint of wisdom. He acquainted his heart with this with wisdom. He did not get so lost in the wine as so many do, that he lost the ability to analyze what it was doing to him and what really ultimate good it could bring. And then he said, he gave himself unto wine, yet acquainting his heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly. Just to see because folly is stupidity, just to see if stupidity was good for men. I mean, he likely tried to do some stupid things himself just to see what good it would do him. Question, have you ever tried something stupid just to see what it would do? You ever? Just to see what it would be like? Of course we all have. We wouldn't want everybody to know every stupid thing we ever tried just to see what it was like. Well, he did that to see if there he could find a purpose for living. And then he comes to this part. He says in verse 4, "I made me great works." Now he's really going to go after it. I made me great works. You're going to find that as he lists off all these great works, and remember, this was a man that had the power and wealth to do all of this, you'll notice the constant recurrence of the reflexive. He doesn't just say, "I made great works." He said, "I made me great works." In other words, he was doing this to find fulfillment for himself. This was for him to find out what was that good, to seek out for himself, to find out what is that good for the sons of men. And so he starts out and he says, "I builded me houses." So he pursued architecture. See if maybe he could find there the ultimate good. And then he said, I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. You know, he tries architecture, and he made a lot of advances in that. I mean, he oversaw the building of the temple, a magnificent structure in Jerusalem, and then his own palace, and then places for his horses and his armor, and he built a house for his wife. And so, I mean, he built houses. He really delved into architecture, and then he delved into horticulture, making himself gardens and orchards and planting all kinds of fruit trees. Maybe here's where the ultimate experience of life could be found. And then he said in verse 6, "I made me pools of water, to water wherewith the wood that bringeth forth the trees." So, you know, he probably had some great waterworks that you could see in Jerusalem that he had planted in pools, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised he made himself a swimming pool. I bet it was something to see. And then I like this one. "I got me servants." And this reflexive thing I think is interesting. It shows up in the South, in the dialect of the South. They make a heavy use of the reflexive. Very often they won't say, "I'm going to take a bath." "I'm going to take me a bath." "I'm going to have me a drink." "I'm going to make me a hamburger." They do that a lot in the South. I wonder if it came from this. So anyway, he says, "I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house." You see, in that day, servants were to people what modern conveniences are to us. Solomon had servants that made his life as convenient for himself as he desired. Anything he wanted done for him was at his beck and call. I mean, just let your imagination run with this. There's Solomon. He wakes up in the morning. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Bring me my breakfast. And he can specify what he wants. He can dictate the menu. And if he doesn't like it, he can send it back to the kitchen. Or bring me a cup of tea or a glass of wine. Or would you trim my toenails and my fingernails for me? Would you draw my bath water? Did you ever see on Downton Abbey where they would have all these servants and the man would have a valet that would dress him? Well, Solomon had that kind of stuff. That's what servants were to people in those days. You didn't have all the modern conveniences, but you still had a lot of convenience if you had a retinue of servants like Solomon. I think I'd like to go for a ride. Would you get this such and such chariot or a wagon or carriage and bring it around to the front and drive me here or there? I mean, you just go on, let your imagination run. Anything he would want was at his beck and call to these servants. Sounds nice, doesn't it, to some? Anyway, he had it. And then he says in verse 7, he said, also, I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I mean, he excelled everyone in town in the possession of cattle. Nobody had a possession like he had. I mean, sheep and cows, you name it, he had it. And then he had quite a gold and silver collection. He said, I gathered me also silver and gold and the peculiar treasure of kings. When you think of the peculiar treasure of kings, the kind of treasures that kings have, you think of things such as fine jewelry, fine clothing, works of art, elaborate furnishings, horses, the best vehicles that could be had at the time. He had the wealth to have it all. And then he said, and of provinces, the peculiar treasure of kings and of provinces. Remember that Solomon was furnished with presents, out of the treasure of the provinces. I mean, the man was enriched. All these different kings and nations would bring him presents, just constantly enriching him with more and more treasure. 1 Kings 4:21 says, 1 Kings 4:21 says he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, from Tiphsah even to Azza, over all the kings on this side the river, and he had peace on all sides round about. And then in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 10, and she gave the king, this is the queen of Sheba, gave the king 120 talents of gold and spices, very great store and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these, which the queen of Sheba gave to the king King Solomon. And then chapter 72 of Psalm 72:10, the kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents, and the kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. So there you got an idea of this possession of the peculiar treasure of kings and of provinces. I mean, look at how many treasures get sent to Queen Elizabeth. I mean, when Princess Diana and Prince Charles married, the gifts that were sent to them from all over the world. Can you imagine? There's no way they could use all of that. They had to have places to store all that stuff. Solomon, no doubt, had to build houses to store all these treasures that he was getting from all over the place. All these kings and all these provinces. Very interesting. And then he says, I like this one. In verse 8, halfway, I got me men singers and women singers. Imagine, he had his own personal choir. Now, he didn't have a radio, he didn't have the internet to listen to music with, but who needed it? You had your own personal choir and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. He had his own personal orchestra. He could have a concert any time he wanted it live. I mean, this is a man that had it all. And so it's almost an understatement when he says, so I was great. Understatement. and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem, and also my wisdom remained with me. So in all of this, he never lost his wisdom. He was still able to sort through it and figure out, amidst all the grandeur and excess that went before him, his wisdom remained with him. He had not lost sight, amidst all the pleasure of what it was. He was trying to discover, and that is, what is that good for the sons of men that they should do under the heaven all the days of their life? And then he says, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I mean, he had the wealth to buy anything he saw in any catalog anywhere. If they had catalogs back then. And amidst all this grandeur, he said, I kept nothing back that his eyes desired. He deprived himself of no pleasure, as he says. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. Now, make no mistake, as he was acquiring all this stuff, he enjoyed it. Wasn't that? He enjoyed his orchestra and his gardens and his pools and treasures. He enjoyed it. My heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. So he did get something out of it. The problem is, it wasn't that he didn't enjoy it. It wasn't that he didn't get something out of it. It wasn't that there wasn't something there to get. After all, it was a portion. But the problem is, it didn't bring him the ultimate fulfillment, you see. It didn't give him the lasting satisfaction. Nothing in this world does or can. So, but as far as bringing lasting fulfillment, we say, and answering the great questions that he posed, his conclusion was, all was vanity and vexation of the spirit. There was no profit under the sun. And so we draw this conclusion from what we've looked at here, and that is that earthly possessions and pleasures are good as far as they go, but they will ultimately disappoint the one who enjoys them. Earthly possessions and pleasures should be thought of as good cups of water along the wearisome journey of life. They give you temporary refreshment, little reprieve, but they are not the everlasting fountain. And people make a mistake when they think of it that way. As for this world, it is not true that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Not here. Not here. Everything of beauty in this world eventually fades, deteriorates, and gets ugly, even ourselves. But the good side of all of this, the good side, is the disappointment that we find in earthly things for us as children of God who have learned and do believe in something beyond the sun, who have that reference of another life. This disappointment in earthly things readies us for a better world. And I want to close on two quotes. C.S. Lewis said, I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy. The most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Think about that. If nothing in this world can fully satisfy me, what does that suggest? I probably was made for something beyond this. I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If this is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only kind of a copy or echo or mirage. That's so rich, if you caught what he said there. If you will notice the descriptions that God gives us in His Word of the next life, He describes it as a beautiful garden. He describes it as good food. He describes it as the joy of marriage. All of these things that we experience in this life. If you and I have no appreciation for fine jewelry, then we would not appreciate the fact that the foundations of the New Jerusalem are laid in fine stones and every gate is a pearl. There's nothing wrong with appreciating beautiful jewelry and enjoying having it if one can afford it, because it's just things like that that God uses to describe the life to come. So what Mr. Lewis is saying is all these things down here, these beautiful things down here that we can enjoy, are pointing us to something beyond the skies. If we try to find the ultimate meaning and good there, they will fail us. But if we view them as just sips of water till we reach the everlasting fountain, if we view them as arrows pointing us to something beyond, then we can truly enjoy them within that framework. That's it. Ted Decker said, when you understand that earthly pleasures are meant only as a foretaste of the indescribable pleasures that await us, your compulsion to overindulge is tempered by the realization that no particular pleasure can ultimately satisfy. You can enjoy them properly when you enjoy them within that moderation and not try to find there the ultimate meaning of life. And just as it is true that we have all these wonderful, beautiful things in this world that we can enjoy that point us beyond the skies, we also have our share of grief and sorrow that points us below the earth. The hell that we, by the grace of God, have escaped, because as I have told you over and over, all the grief and the sorrow and the pain you endure in this life as a child of God, this is the only hell you will ever endure. And then when you leave this world, it's over. And all the good you enjoyed in this world will be expanded to dimensions and degrees beyond anything that we in this present state can possibly comprehend. But oh, won't it be nice to find it out. Well, 3 sermons. I made it to the middle of chapter 2. That's a record time, isn't it? Well, I hope you got a blessing from that. God bless the truth and pardon any error. Thank you for your patient attention.